West Burlington Falcons. I didn't even see you guys walk into the room. I was just spending a little bit of time playing one of my favorite pieces by one of my favorite composers, Johann Sebastian Bach. Well, since you guys are here, let's go ahead and have a little bit of music class. Today, we're going to learn about the person I was just talking about Johann Sebastian Bach. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about who he was, the music that he wrote. We'll listen to several pieces of his music. We'll even move along to one of them. So let's get going. This is our welcome song that we're going to be singing at the beginning of every single online music class. We're going to start the song with a little bit of singing, and then we're going to have a little bit of a break for some body percussion. All you need to do during that time is listen to the teacher first, and then echo after the teacher. Let's try our welcome song called Welcome to the Music Room. Welcome to the music room, welcome to the music room, welcome to the music room, ready, set, here we go. Welcome to the music room, welcome to the music room, welcome to the music room, ready, set, here we go. Today, boys and girls, we're going to be learning about the great Baroque composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. That is Bach with a h, not a k. Let's try that all together now. Johann Sebastian Bach.
Johann Sebastian Bach.
Now, before we get really in depth with who Bach was, I want to review for just a moment and ask you, what is a composer? Yes, Tony? Yeah. Ain't those the guys that use their rotten leftovers for gardening? Those would be composters, Tony. We're looking for the definition of composers. Yeah, Arnold. A composer is someone who writes new music, especially as their profession or job. Exactly. A composer is a professional music writer, and there is no bigger name in the composing industry than Johann Sebastian Bach, especially because he happens to be the first member of the Big Three. We're not worthy! We're not worthy! What's the Big Three? The Big Three is a group of three composers who are considered to be the most influential and the most famous composers from Western Europe. They include Johann Sebastian Bach, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. Oh, so they're like the mainstream of classical music? So overrated. Ooh, not so. They're all famous for a very important reason. Each one of them have had a massive influence on how music is written, even by today's standards. I give them all nicknames, and that kind of helps me remind me of the roles that they play in how music is written. Bach is known as the inventor, and I call him the inventor because he's the one who wrote the rules. He's the one who wrote the rules about how to write music. Now, you might be thinking, why do we need rules about how to write music? Music is all about creativity. We should be able to make music however we want. But without the rules that Bach had set in stone, we might end up having people who write music that sounds like this. I call Bach the inventor, I like to call Mozart the master. And that's because Mozart took the rules that Bach had invented them and he perfected them to the utmost degree. He then went on to inspire other composers through his music, including the final member of the Big Three, Ludwig van Beethoven, who I call the innovator. Now, he's the innovator because he took the rules that Bach had wrote and that Mozart had perfected, and then he bent them and he broke them and he molded them into brand new ways of writing music. He took those rules and he changed them to make more complex music. That is the importance of every single member of the Big Three. So they're a pretty big deal, right? They are the biggest of deals. Now, let's get Bach to Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach was born in 1685 in Eisenach, Germany, to a family of musicians. He came from a rather massive family and was the youngest of 8 children. Bach's father was a professional musician and began to teach Johann several instruments, including violin and organ. As Bach grew older, he left his home to pursue a career as a professional organist, learning from one of the greatest organists at the time, Dietrich Buxtehude. Now just imagine having a mouthful of a name like Buxtehude. Buxtehude had a big impact on Bach, who found work as a professional organist at various churches in Germany. Working as a church organist was by no means an easy job. Bach not only had to perform every week for church, but he also had to compose music known as cantatas for the church services every single week. Each cantata was relatively long, lasting about 20 minutes each. Bach had greater aspirations than just being a church musician, so he sought a job with royalty, working with the court of Duke Wilhelm Ernst, where he wrote one of his most famous compositions, Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Now, Bach was later hired by Prince Leopold, but Duke Wilhelm was so intent on keeping Bach around that he went as far as imprisoning Bach for a short time. Bach's works were often dedicated to the people he worked for and the locations of where he was working. For example, Bach was hired to compose some music for the Duke of Brandenburg, and thus Bach wrote the Brandenburg Concertos, a collection of 6 compositions that feature a solo instrument against an orchestra. In Bach's final years, he had become so popular that he performed for the King of Prussia, known as Friedrich the Great. However, it was also during this time that Bach began to lose his eyesight, and after a failed surgery, was left completely blind. Bach would later pass away soon afterward, in the year 1750. His work would later influence countless composers, including fellow members of the Big Three, Mozart and Beethoven. Now, I could talk about Bach all day long and be perfectly happy, but I'm sure you would be much more interested having the opportunity to just listen to some of his music. We're going to do that right now by listening to 3 of his most famous compositions, 3 of his most famous works. We're going to begin with his Cello Suite Number 1, the first movement called the Prelude. Now, Bach wrote 6 cello suites in all. Each cello suite is made up of several movements, smaller sections of music that are pieced together to form one very long piece of music. We're not going to listen to the entire cello suite, but we are going to listen to the first movement, the Prelude. The cellist that you will hear is professional cellist Yo-Yo Ma. This is Bach's Cello Suite Number 1. What are some of the things that you notice about this composition as you listen to it? For example, how many instruments do you hear? might have heard this piece before. Maybe you could tell someone around you, maybe someone at home. Where have you heard this piece of music If you're listening closely and you're trying to find the steady beat of the music, you might find that it's really hard to find that steady beat. In music, we call this term rubato. It's when the tempo kind of fluctuates. It's slowing down and it's speeding back up. It's stretching all the time. Rubato. Here comes the end. Despite this piece being written hundreds of years ago, it is still performed very often today, especially by cellists. But even those who don't play the cello have made transcriptions. They've taken this piece of music and they've rewritten it for their own instruments. It's still a very popular piece to perform today. I had mentioned just a little while ago that Bach had spent some time working for the Duke of Brandenburg, and during that time he wrote 6 compositions known as the Brandenburg Concertos. A concerto is a piece of music that features one solo instrument surrounded by an orchestra in the background. We're going to listen to Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, Movement 3. The solo instrument is the piccolo trumpet, and the musician performing the solo instrument is known as Maurice Andre. This is Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, Movement 3. What are some of the instruments that you hear in this composition? And not just the solo instrument, the instruments in the background. There's some that you might not have ever heard before, like the harpsichord. Harpsichord's a little bit like piano. You play it by pressing down on keys, but the way that it is played, the strings inside the harpsichord are plucked rather than hammered like in a piano. Compare the steady beat of this piece to the Bach cello suite that we listened to before. Are we having a lot of rubato, a lot of fluctuating, swaying back and forth between fast and slow? Or is it keeping a pretty steady beat? Is the steady beat fast or slow? I mentioned that Maurice Andre is playing the solo instrument a piccolo trumpet. Do you know the difference between a piccolo trumpet and a standard trumpet? The trumpet that you're used to seeing. A piccolo trumpet is much smaller, and because it's much smaller, it also plays much higher. if you've listened to the past two pieces and you're thinking, Mr. Henman, I have never heard either of those pieces before, well, you're in luck, because I can almost guarantee that you have heard this final composition that we're going to listen to right now. We're going to listen to Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. It is a piece that is written specifically for the organ, and you might have heard this tune around Halloween. Let's take a listen to Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. We're not going to listen to the entire thing because the entire thing is about 10 minutes long, but we'll listen to the first part and you're going to instantly recognize it. So, how many of you already recognize this piece? Quite a few of you. Now, while a lot of you probably recognize this from scary TV shows or a scary movie, something ominous happening in the background of whatever you're watching, this piece was not originally meant to be really that scary. Just like most of Bach's works, this music was meant to be used for a church setting, used to play on an organ. The organ's a pretty interesting instrument. It's set up a little bit like the piano, but if you've ever seen an organ in real life, they've got these really tall pipes that go way up. Now, when you press down a key on the organ, you have air that pushes up through those pipes, and it's kind of like a whistle. If you've ever seen a whistle, the air moves through those pipes and out through a little opening to create the different notes. An organ is unique because it can sustain a note for as long as possible. As long as you want it to sustain a note, it can keep the note going, as long as there's air that is continuing to move through it. Now, this is probably Bach's most famous composition. We're going to talk about the definition of a fugue right now. This is Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Let's talk about what is a fugue. Bach was most famous for writing a type of composition called a fugue. A fugue is a composition in which the theme, a short section of the melody, is repeated or imitated by other voices in the music. Now that just seems really complicated. For a lot of kids your age, that can be very confusing. So I want you to think about it this way. A fugue is sort of like when you have a younger sibling, maybe a younger brother and sister, and they really like to get on your nerves. And they know that they can always get on your nerves. They can always annoy you if they copy everything you say. And sometimes they use a different type of voice. Sometimes it might be a really high-pitched voice. Or sometimes it could be a little grouchy. You get the point. Okay, they get it. They've heard enough. Okay, seriously, you need to go. I hope that helps you understand what a fugue is a little bit, but if you're still a little bit confused, here's a little song I wrote that might help you understand what is a fugue. Bach was known for writing fugues, now listen for the imitation. Bach was known for writing fugues, now listen for the imitation. Bach was known for writing fugues, now listen for the imitation. Bach was known for writing fugues, now you can hear the imitation. Fugues, they imitate. Right now, we're going to listen to one of Bach's most famous fugues, known as his Little Fugue in G minor. And as we listen to it, I want you to count the number of times that the main theme of the fugue is imitated by other voices. Now, the main theme goes a little bit like this. Do, sol, me, re, do, ti, re, so. Anytime you hear that melody being played by the organ, that would be considered an imitation of the main theme. Now remember that in a fugue, the imitation doesn't have to be the exact same notes. Sometimes it is imitated in a higher pitch, and sometimes it is imitated in a lower pitch. So instead of do, sol, me, re, do, ti, re, so, you might get something like this. Do, sol, me, re, do, ti, re, so. It could be higher, it could be lower. So I want you to listen to Bach's Little Fugue in G minor. Count how many times do you hear that theme. Go ahead and count the very first time it appears. You will hear it right off the bat. You're going to count that as one. Anytime you hear it imitated after that, I want you to add that to your tally. We'll see how many you've got at the end. So how'd you do? Do you think you heard every single imitation in Bach's Little Fugue in G minor? It can be very difficult because, as I mentioned before, those imitations can be in different voices. Sometimes it'll be higher, sometimes it'll be lower. Sometimes it'll be major, sometimes it will be minor. And what I mean by that, when music is in major, it kind of sounds happy. It sounds a little playful, a little joyful. If music sounds minor, it's gonna sound sad, a little depressing, sometimes even angry. So, did you count them all? I counted 10 imitations altogether, including the first theme, 10. Now maybe you got a different number, maybe you got some more than 10, maybe you had a little less than 10. You can always rewind the video and try again, see if you can count all 10 imitations that I heard. Yeah, I mean, Bach is cool and all, but I was a fan of his before he was big. Anyway, I was in Portland the other day and I learned the hippest new dance that hasn't quite hit the mainstream yet. You might not have heard about it, but it uses Bach's Badenary from his orchestral suite number 2. Check it out. If you have your paper plates, your plastic plates handy, you're gonna need these for this hip new dance that we're going to do. If you don't have your plates, forget about it. You can just use your hands and it'll work perfectly fine. Let's give it a shot. Again, I said so long, farewell to you, my friends. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. It's been great to play and sing together, but now it's time to say goodbye. So long, farewell to you, my friends. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. I said goodbye for now, until we meet again. I'll see you all next week. I hope you enjoyed our music class today, especially because we got to spend it learning about such an influential composer like Bach. Now, it's interesting, music has changed so much in the several hundred years since Bach has been alive, but his rules are still used by many musicians today. You know what they always say? If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to practice my Goldberg variations.